Hanavi calls out in Eicha, Kalu badmaos einaycha marmaru me'ai. My eyes are blind, have been consumed by tears. Chamar maru me'ai, my insides are completely burned up. Nishpach la'aretz kvedi, my kidneys don't function. Al shever basami, on how bad, on how low our people are. Be'atev olel v'yonek berchovos kirya. When young babies and young children are fainting in the streets of the city because they're so hungry, because there's no food, because they have no parents. I hope that in the shiurim today, everybody will take a few moments to discuss the horrible tragedy that befell our people over Shabbos. That 5 holy Jews were brutally murdered, as you all know, among them young children and even little babies. It's probably better for everybody to try to think about this and hopefully process this on your own. I hope that those of you that can handle it, and frankly, I'm sure there's people here who cannot handle it, but those who can handle should see the pictures. It's better that everybody should process this on their own, and hopefully this year we'll talk about it for a few moments. But I just want to make a couple of general comments for the yeshiva of, I think, things that we need to think about. And I guess the first thing is exactly that. That we cannot allow an event of this magnitude to pass by our lives and not have a reaction. We can't just go about life the same way we went about life before something like this happens. The first thing is, everything that happens, especially something in such a dramatic way, is a message and a lesson to each one of us. What that message is, maybe we'll discuss, and maybe everybody has to process it for themselves. But the first thing is, we can't just go by life and say we're going to have today the same what we had yesterday. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending a message to us. What did I think about this? Just a couple of brief thoughts. Number one, the level of hatred that exists in the world towards Jews. To think that there could be a human being somewhere on this earth that could do what he did to a defenseless, to a mother and father sleeping in bed, to a defenseless child, to a 4-month-old child. How much hatred is there against us in the world? The second thing is the horrible double standard that the world has when it rates issues like this, which is related to the first. Because of the fact that we are a hated people, can you imagine what the outcry in the world would have been if a Jew would have done something like this to an Arab? We would all have to protect ourselves. We'd have to hire armed guards on the front of every Jewish establishment. And yet, do we hear the United Nations coming out with resolutions? Do we hear the world screaming? What are the front pages of all the papers in the world talking about today? We barely see mention of this. That's a double standard that we have to get used to, and that is a fact. But we have to be aware of it, and we have to talk out about this. Last night I was at a chasana, and my son, who's in Eretz Yisrael, studying for the year, called me in the middle of the wedding, and I didn't realize what he was calling about. He doesn't usually call me in the middle of the week. And it was the Badekin was about to start, so I just spoke to him briefly. I said, the Badekin started, let me call you back in a few minutes, and then it was the chuppah. I was getting a bracha, I didn't know when it was being called up, so I just texted him. I couldn't talk to him, I couldn't speak in the middle of the chuppah, so I just texted him, and he sent one line to me there. You know, I just said, is everything okay? And he said, I had to talk to my father. So I figured out what happened, why he needed to talk to me. Of course, like so many people in Eretz Yisrael, yesterday he attended the funeral of these 5 people. And he actually went straight to a wedding afterwards, and he said he had such a emotionally draining day. Can you imagine what it is for children to wake up in the morning and not have parents? Any parents. It's difficult to fathom. And I think one thing that we should also take from here is to appreciate what we have, is to appreciate our families, to appreciate the fact that we have Eretz Yisrael, the spiritual nerve center of our people. A place where when something like this happens, people actually stand up and care. And I think in this regard, it's also one final point, and then again, to leave the rest for you to hopefully talk about in the shiurim and come to some resolution. And in this, I also incorporate the incredible devastation wreaked by the DRSHALB and the earthquake and the tsunami that ravaged Japan. I hope some of you saw some of the video about that. It's absolutely unbelievable. But the other point is, both with the tragedy in Eretz Yisrael and this other tragedy that happened, HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. It is not for us to ask the question of why this family was targeted, why that particular remote corner of the world was destroyed the way it was. But that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and one moment we can think that we're living in the relative safety and security of our homes and our communities. In another moment, a person's entire world can be turned upside down. A person's entire family and entire life can be turned upside down. We don't ask why HaKadosh Baruch Hu does what he does. We don't know. His omniscience, his knowledge is way above our comprehension. But what we do know is that he controls the world, and it is in him and only in him that we put our trust, that we put our faith, and that we know that he controls the world. And hopefully, we can use these events to further feel HaKadosh Baruch Hu's hand in our day-to-day lives. To realize that he controls our destiny. We control whether we're going to be a tzaddik or not. But he controls the circumstances and events that run our lives. I hope that just as the rabbi of my shul, Rabbi Weinberger, likes to always say, that the Jewish heart has to know how to have pain and sorrow in one side and joy in the other. We're celebrating this morning a tremendous simcha as well, and Rabbi Bolzum's having a baby girl, and we're in the month of simcha. It's difficult. It should be difficult for us to celebrate simcha and to mourn at the same time. But hopefully, if we can take the messages that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us to heart, we often, unfortunately, forget. We get lulled into a sense of every day is the same, just doing the same thing yesterday and today. We forget about the fact that there's HaKadosh Baruch Hu out there who's running the world and who wants us to remember that He's there. He wants us to daven to Him. He wants us to call out to Him. He wants us to learn. He wants us to have a relationship with Him. And hopefully, the more we can internalize the message of this relationship, the more we will not need the Rabbanu Shalom in such a stark and horrifying way to remind us that He runs the world, that He decides what happens. May we never know of these tragedies. May no one in our community have to experience, and all of Am Yisrael have to experience a tragedy like this. And may we look forward to that day when the nations of the world will no longer hate us, will no longer have that horrible, venomous hatred to us, as the Pasuk says, that even the non-Jews in the future will come to recognize the Malchus Hashem. May that day come, B'mehera B'yameinu, Amen.